Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of You Guessed It, Cancel Me Baby. I have such a special guest today, and let me just tell you, if this conversation is anything like our private conversations, our DMs, our emails, you better hold on to your shorts because it is going down today. Okay, let me introduce to you the one and only Unni Turrettini. Is that the right That's the right way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Perfect.
Yes.
Taylor.
And she looks so beautiful too today, but let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a speaker, a writer, a connection expert. Okay. She was on ABC's The List. She was on Fox. She is part of the New York Bar. She worked in law, and you guys are going to love this. She wrote a book exposing those hoes over at the Nobel Peace Prize. So yes, like I said, it is going down today. So here's how it's going down, guys. We're going to kind of do this in two parts. The first part, we're going to talk everything cancel culture, how it's leading to, I feel like people don't really talk about this, but the loneliness problem, it's like a loneliness epidemic, as Unni says. Her book, Betraying the Nobel, which is from 2020, I am salivating, cannot wait to get into this. And then the second half is going to be all things gender, okay? Toxic femininity, gender roles, men being emasculated, all this. Oh my God. Oh boy, it is. I'm grabbing my coffee, Unni. I'm ready. Welcome to Cancel Me Baby. And thank you for joining us in your gorgeous orange blazer. I don't know about you, but I am so ready. Here is my coffee.
Thank you so much, Taylor. I am so excited to be here and talking with you. I've been listening to your podcast and it's so much fun listening. And also it's so refreshing to just listen to someone saying it as it is. And I think that's what's lacking today, right? In our culture.
I appreciate that so much. And that's why you and I kind of hit it off, because sadly, that is the truth. It's like what people are thinking, but we don't hear. But and so it's refreshing. So you and I immediately hit it off. We're going back and forth with all of these ideas. So let's just hop right into it. Also, I never normally shoot this early in the morning, so let's see how it goes. I'm either going to have less of a filter, like truly give no Fs, or just have an IV drip, of coffee. So we'll see how this goes. But you brought something to me that was really interesting. Okay. With this whole cancel culture, what we can and can't say. I feel like there's even a level. I mean, I even do it on my show of like a self-censorship, right? Because you don't want to slip and say something wrong. But you talk about how it's lending itself to people being really lonely and it being a problem. So talk to me about that, because I feel like that's something, people don't explore.
Yeah, absolutely, Taylor. And we know, like we've been talking recently, past few months, even a couple of years, talking about this loneliness epidemic. So many people today struggling with loneliness in the US right now. 3 out of 5 American adults, right, are struggling with loneliness. And the younger, between 18 and 30 are those who are struggling the most. Wow. And we talk about this as a, mental health issue and all the things, but we don't really talk about why, right? And I think today, just like go back to like how you're censoring yourself and how we all, like how I'm censoring myself on my Instagram, right? Like not speaking courageously enough, like telling it as it is. And when we don't do that, when we don't show people who we are, when we're not being authentic, basically, we're following a narrative that we think is what's expected of us. And so that we can fit in and be accepted and be loved and all these things. But the problem with that is that we are losing ourselves. And so an important part of feeling connected and feeling belonging is that you have confidence in yourself and confidence in other people. And so that when we are not authentic and we don't feel that we are seen and loved for who we truly are, then we lose that confidence in self. We lose a sense of self-worth. And I think that's the real epidemic on our planet. And that is something that we don't talk enough about because we're not allowing people to be authentic, right? We're not allowing them because we don't want to hear it. If they don't agree with the accepted narrative in our world, we don't want to hear it. You're shut down automatically, canceled, right?
Absolutely. And, I feel like the self-censoring doesn't get enough attention because it's on such a minor level. But even like I said, the fact, as you said, that even the premise of my show is just coming out with these opinions. And this climate has made it to where even I will sit and ruminate even after an episode, I swear to God, going, oh my God, did I say this the right way? Oh, shoot, I left this out. Okay, should I just edit this part out? Okay. And I have people being like, oh my God, like it's that deep. Because I feel like we get caught up in the big, like, oh, this Marvel actor had to make an apology. Oh, this, and it's not always on that big grand scale. It's in day-to-day life. I mean, look at what's happening, across industries, in schools, right? Something I'm really passionate about is kids' mental health. I mean, I talk about it on my show all the time. Even in young women, I believe age 12 to 17, the suicide rate has gone up 50%. Since 2020. So talk to me about how this environment, like the granular aspect of the day-to-day of how this could impact them and mess with them. Because something else I also explore on the show is how they're really suffering and getting hurt while adult leaders are so caught up in their petty bullshit at the cost of these young kids. I think COVID is a perfect example. We were drilled with stay home, have no human contact. And these kids are have been suffering. And it's not fair and it's not right. And no one is paying attention to them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And just to start with the whole pandemic, right? The whole COVID situation. I mean, young healthy people were not really at risk at all, right? But they were still, told to stay home, homeschooling, all the stuff. And they are the ones that suffered the most.
Of this, don't even get me started.
Whole isolation, right? Like, exactly. When you are at that age where you are supposed to be separating and becoming independent and like being with your friends and hanging out, and you couldn't even do that for 2 years, it's crazy the impact that has on our mental health. And and people, and young people have all sorts of ways of dealing with that. Some people get eating disorders and, a lot of people go on medication, and it's just a lot of people lose hope. You lose trust also when we've been seeing like what our politicians, what our leaders, how they have been dealing with this, like back and forth, like you never knew like what's going to happen in 5 minutes, right? If we're going to be at home or not, or like, what are the rules? So it's like, seems like there's almost like a punishment on on a young generation. Research that came out was conflicting. Even what they were saying on the news and the politicians were saying, it was conflicting. So how are you supposed to have confidence, right, in other people, let alone yourself? Yes. And when that confidence, when that trust erodes, that's when we're in trouble. And that, distrust fuels loneliness, and loneliness, fuels and drives people toward extremism, to uprisings, depression, right? Like a lot of depression. And either self-harm or violence toward others. And that's what we've been seeing as well with the rise in mass shootings just in the last couple of years too.
Yeah. And an added layer onto that is, if you so much, it goes back into what you were saying earlier, like having a certain school of thought and in turn feeling lonely or isolated. Yeah. An added layer is, if you so much as challenge or question, and it applies, Unni, to so many issues, COVID, trans issues, violence, like if you so much as question it though, and that's where the self-censoring comes in, you're punished. With that said, because I know you feel obviously so passionately about this, I hear people all the time who say, well, what do you mean? You can say whatever you want. Yeah, she's nodding. You can say whatever you want. Censor, of course now everything is a left-right political divide, right? But, people on the left and on the right, they're censored just as equally and blah, blah, blah. And they're all kicked off this platform, that platform, algorithm, this, that, right? I just think that that's insanity. I mean,
Yeah.
of course you have to prescribe into almost like an orthodoxy school of thought. We see it happen. We see it happen in schools. We see it happen in journalism. We see it happen in medicine, in entertainment, we see it happen everywhere. So what would your thoughts be to someone who's like, well, no, you can in theory, you can really you can say whatever you want.
Well,
No
first
one's
of all,
stopping you.
yeah, no, exactly. Well, first of all, that's BS, right? I mean, it's total BS that you can say whatever you want without consequences. Of course, it has consequences, and the problem is that we are human beings, and human beings are hardwired for connection. We're hardwired to belong within a group, and if you are ridiculed, if you are excluded, if you feel that that you're losing your friends are blocking you, or deleting you, canceling you because of something that you say, because something that you think or feel, then how are you supposed to, like most people today, and this is even research saying this, most young people today, or even anyone on social media, will not say what they really think. Most of us. Mm-hmm. And that's really scary. When did this happen? Like, it used to be that you could disagree and it was fine, that we could have discussions, that we could have completely different views on anything, politics, whatever, and we could still be in the same family, we could still be in the same group of friends, and it was okay, it was fine. But today it's not. And what I feel like we're living now in a totalitarian regime. And what's so funny about that, which is so hypocritical, is that last year's Peace Prize was given to these journalists, one in the Philippines and one in Russia, in two dictatorships, right? Like, they're living in dictatorship, and this was a shout out to freedom of speech, the right to information, all these things, right? And it's so I was just laughing to myself when they gave this prize out, because I'm like, oh, well, they might as well have given that out to any one of us, right? Because we are fighting the same thing right here. Like, you don't have to go to Russia or China or the Philippines to be canceled. Right.
So it's really interesting. That was going to be my next thought. We're going to talk all about the Nobel organization and how it's corrupt and the distrust. And, anybody, does that sound familiar to you? I mean, really, just let me know. You are overseas. So that's what I wanted to ask, this cancel culture, so to speak, which in and of itself has become almost like a buzzword. But what is your general sense of the climate, in the US versus Europe versus, maybe Canada? Like, what is your take on, is it worse in certain parts? Is it comparable? Bring us over the pond.
Yeah. Oh God, this is a great question. And it used to be, to me, I'm Norwegian. I was born and raised here, but I left as a young woman. I left because I didn't feel like I was allowed to be myself, that I could really be who I wanted to be, right? I mean, in Norway, we have this very strong culture of conformity. Like, if you only have value,
it's my nightmare,
when you belong in the group, right? Like, outside of that, like, as an individual, you're worth nothing. And so there's almost like this group narcissism, right? Like, we as a group are best and we know best. And who do you think you are as a little individual trying to say anything, right? So I didn't feel like I could be myself in that culture. So I left. Like, I went to the US, I spent time in the US, in France, and in Switzerland. And I only came back 5 years ago here, and took my Swiss husband and kids with me. And it's so funny to observe what I felt like. I always felt like in the US, I could be myself. I was, it was encouraged to be you as an individual, all the things, right? Yep. And what happened? Like, Canada as well, it used to be this to me, this haven of freedom. And lots of Europeans would move to the US, to Canada, to live there, because they felt that they could really be themselves and have the freedom that they longed for. Mm-hmm. And now it's almost crazy how that has changed. And to me, and it's funny because I've been listening to, and reading mainstream media, news, all the things in the US for so many years, and observing how they are, talking about Norway and Scandinavia as this utopia, like the best place in the world, all, the welfare system, the freedom, everything. And to me, that's a really good marketing campaign on behalf of Scandinavia and especially Norway with the Peace Prize and everything. But they don't realize what it really is to live here in this culture where you're not allowed to be yourself. And here too, people are saying, oh, but you can say whatever you want. Like nobody's going to kill you like they do in Russia, or send you to Siberia.
Right.
But it's still a survival instinct in all of us to be part of the group, because if you don't belong to the group, you don't exist. Like you are dead. And it's so ingrained in us as human beings. So it's not true that that you can say whatever you want. It's not true.
So basically it's bad everywhere.
Yeah, it's bad everywhere. I mean, we thought we were living in democracies, right? Like democracy is supposed to be all about freedom to choose what you want to do, freedom to say, like the freedom of speech is the foundation for our democracy. And when you no longer can say what you want and you can no longer get the information that you need to make an informed decision about anything, right? Because so much of the information is censored. And then they talk about, there's so much fake news. Yeah, maybe there are fake news, but let us as people decide for ourselves. Let us have some faith in us so that we can make proper decisions and decide what are we going to take? What are we going to believe in or not? Right? That's democracy.
I've said the same thing. And then you have people who counter that going, well, there's really stupid people out there. There are people who aren't educated and aren't informed. Well, okay. Well, that's too bad for them then. Let us decide for ourselves. And it became this thing where it's like, no, we have to spoon feed you everything. And you're right. And even when you say, I could even hear in my head people being like, yeah, okay, lady. Yeah, sure. What, oh, okay. People who buy into the group think, right? Saying, oh, here's another one. Yeah. Okay, sure. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's so disempowering. I mean, we also live in a culture where you have all these people, on this, they talk about empowerment. They talk about freedom of speech. Their talk is good, right? Like they say all the right things, but then there's no follow-up in action because, it's not empowering to believe people are stupid. And that you have to spoon feed them what they're going to think and believe and say. That's a dictator talking. That's not, these are not leaders of democracies and freedom.
I completely agree. I've always said, give people a little credit.
Yeah.
I don't want anybody. Yeah.
Don't underestimate us, know?
Exactly. A segue into, the Nobel, exposing this organization. I just wanted to tell you a little story I was reading yesterday that was really powerful and feeds into the story you were saying earlier about it. And this whole idea, right, is our distrust in these organizations and information. So I read a story yesterday about a man who worked for Reuters for 6 years. And when everything was happening with BLM, he was a stats guy, making 6 figures, looking at all the numbers of everything. And he started to look into the stats and he realized, looking at all these numbers, all of these studies, one prominent one that was carried out by a Black man, what the news was telling us was wrong, right? They had these sensationalized headlines like, Black people being shot at and killed at a much more, fatally killed at a higher rate and all this and that, when he actually found that white people were killed more, and that, I think in 1 year, there were 18 Black people killed by police and 10,000 killed in bad neighborhoods.
Yes.
Right. So why is nobody paying attention to this when there's all this sensationalism and hoopla over defunding the police, when these are the communities that need the police, right, the most? So he brought this to the attention of Reuters, presented all of these studies, all of these numbers, and he gives the nitty gritty, but was met in the organization with so much flack, you talk about the loneliness problem. Like, he was ostracized. He was called names by his colleagues. His piece was taken down. He was called to HR. No one gave him reason as to why. They said that he was, starting shit up basically. And he's like, I'm just presenting the facts, and I want to bring to light where this violence and where Black people are really getting hurt the most. Right. But it's like, well, you can't have actually sane thinking or numbers. It's, let's just go with this sensationalized narrative. And then he was fired. So I think that is a really poignant and powerful example of how deep this goes. And Reuters reaches, millions of people a day. So you can only imagine, right? So similarly, I mean, we talk about distrust, and half the time we're like, we don't even know. Even I'm like, I look at what's going on in Ukraine, this, that, COVID. I'm like, I don't even know what to believe.
Yeah.
So you really brought this to light again with your book, Betraying the Nobel, which has me again, like salivating. Talk about how this lack of transparency and this distrust applies to this organization, because again, like what an oxymoron, right? Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
I would have never known this. Call me naive, but
no, you're not naive at all, because you haven't received this information, because everything that you have been fed by news internationally is about how wonderful this Peace Prize is and what a great job they're doing and all these wonderful Peace Prize winners, right? And I thought the same thing. And I'm Norwegian. And then in 2009, they gave the Peace Prize to Obama, right? And he had been in office for less than 2 weeks when he was nominated, right? So like, he hadn't done any of the things that the committee said that he had done. Like, he hadn't even started yet. So I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's really weird. Let me look into that. So I started researching the Nobel Peace Prize, and I started looking at what Alfred Nobel, what he wanted with his prize, like back in the last century, right? When he established his prize. And he wanted to promote peace champions, people that stand up to abusive leadership, people who try to unify people, create brotherhood, all the things that, we believe are good. And in our culture today, what we're seeing is that a separation, right? And that which leads to so much loneliness, but we are being separated by a narrative where we are pitted up against one another. And you see, like with your piece, what you were just, telling me was exactly a great example of that, because we are, supposed to believe that there's more racism than maybe there is. We're supposed to believe that there's this toxic racism, and that only Black people are attacked, and we're the bad guys, and like if you're a white and a Black person, you can't belong and be friends and be united because there's such differences, right? Separation. And if you're a man today, like this whole, we're going to get into that, like the toxic masculinity and how we've been fed that story. And I know you have, struggled with, when you spoke up about the Me Too movement, right? Like you got in trouble because, we're supposed to believe this narrative that like, if you're a woman, you can't be the abuser, and you're just like, oh, the poor woman, and like all the men are bad, and like we're pitted up against one another, right? And it creates so much fear and so much drama and so much, separation. That's also when, it creates this loneliness in us because we are separated, and they do that, I believe, on purpose, because only when we are separated can they keep the power. Because I believe that there are only a few people who really actually believe this narrative that they're telling us to believe, right? I think most people want to keep their freedom, want to keep their freedom of speech. They want to also decide over their own bodies, whether we're talking abortion or injections, right? Like we want to be able to decide ourselves. And over our gender, all the things we want to decide ourselves. And, if you all these new rules they have set up for us now, like these mandatory things, I think most people are against those, but we are not allowed, we don't dare to say it because we don't think that other people will have our backs.
That's what it is. It goes so deep. And when this guy, he wrote this article in such detail about coming out with this, and he talks about how he would ruminate being up all night, checking with his wife, do I come out with this? I feel like it's the right thing to do. But, we have BLM signs at every one of our neighbors and my colleagues. And, it's like that mental anguish, and that even on a granular level, again, like I'll feel that sometimes with every episode I put out or an op-ed I write, when I wrote, an unpopular opinion piece that, that was a whole story with Chrissy Teigen at VH1 years ago. No, similar to him, no one had my back. It's that deep, and it's on that level of really feeling like, yeah, you'll be ostracized. No one will have your back. And it's a very, to your point, a very isolating thing.
Yeah. It's a very scary place that we're in. And I think I think that's also why your podcast, why, Joe Rogan, why are people listening to you guys, right? Like, why are we listening? Like, more than we are watching any other news. Like, why are we listening to you? Because we're getting something that is real, and it doesn't matter. You don't have to be 100% correct all the time or right. Like you can mess up and say like stuff like, oh my God, like I was wrong, or I changed my mind or whatever. And that's fine. That's part of being human, but we want real. And we trust you because we believe that we're getting something that's real. And that's why, people are so scared of Joe Rogan, because he has so many listeners, so many people watching and listening, because he's the real deal. And like, you don't have to like him. You don't have to agree, but at least you're getting something, like someone who is humble enough to say, well, you know what? I was wrong. Like, I apologize for that stupid thing I said,
Yes. And it goes back into that idea of control. It's like a Joe Rogan. What is so threatening? What is so scary? I've heard people be like, oh, here he is spewing this and that. Yeah. What is so threatening about that? Again, it goes into the idea of let us decide for ourselves. It's really that idea of control. And even I want to bring it back quickly before we wrap this first half up. Yeah. When you talk about, even again with the narrative, right? Obama, the Nobel Prize, I can hear people again in the back of my mind going, oh, here we go. And that's a sad part too, right? Is like, you have one thought that's common sense or facts perhaps, or, an observation that's not in the narrative, and you're automatically some like right-wing nut job, right? Exactly. And something that this man who wrote the BLM piece, funny enough, who's a liberal, and he says, what happened? Like, liberal or not, aren't we all, especially liberals, like, weren't we supposed to be about like numbers and opposing views and thoughts and facts and actual news? Like, since when did it become this topsy-turvy thing? Like, what's going on here? This isn't what we're about. And that's what's scary. And so for your book, last kind of thought on this, you say, they filled the committee with politicians more loyal to their political party's agenda than to the Nobel Prize's prerogative. Yeah. So do you think this is ever going to be looked into more or exposed more? Like, what is really going on, and why is this not more on a mainstream? I mean, I know the obvious reason as to why, but.
Well, I hope something is going to change. And that's why I wrote this book, because I wanted to expose it. And I wrote it in English, and my publisher is in New York, and I wanted it to be exposed abroad, right? Because internationally, people don't know. In Norway, we kind of know about it because we've seen it, over the years, and it's been criticized within Norway, but like, it doesn't really come out internationally. And so what I discovered when I started looking into the prize and researching was that the Obama Prize was the last prize in a long series of years of prizes that were given. They gave this prize to people not because they deserved Nobel's Peace Prize, but because they did something or said something that was in line with the Norwegian government's policy. Right. So and they're so arrogant, Taylor, that they even say it openly, at the reception of the prize. They say it like it's in the media, in Norwegian media. They say it like, this year, we're given this prize. It's a slap in the face to the Bush administration, because, it's almost like they're saying, look at us, look at Norway, how we do things over here, how we have this welfare system. We have this, beautiful system here. We're so happy. and all the things, and look at what you were doing, like you capitalism, because they're so on the left, right? So they're like everything that is capitalism, everything that is all the things in the US, what the Bush and the right was standing for, they were against. So there's like a long line of prices that were slaps in other politicians' faces.
Oh my God.
Nothing to do.
Don't even get me started.
Like,
and
right?
It's like when it comes to capitalism, don't even get me. Okay, Obama, give up your mansions. Bye. Good luck with that. Let me know how that goes. Like, it just drives me crazy.
Yeah.
How far back, Unni, does this go with the organization?
With the organization,
yes,
and
because this whole narrative thought control obviously is what maybe like really heightened in the last 5 or so years.
I would say it started way before. This is something that's, it's actually the Peace Prize has been a political tool for the Norwegian government since the beginning of the prize in 1905, because, remember, Norway was a very poor country. We're this like tiny place, very poor country, right? Before, we discovered oil and all the things. And so we needed protection. So, and also like First World War, we needed protection from the United States. So they gave all these prizes to US politicians and presidents to like forge a bond between the two countries, right? And then after World War II, we were scared of the Russians, right? Because it was either like the US and NATO or the Russians, right, to build up the country again after the Nazi occupation. So it's been like this political tool this whole time. But I would say, especially after, during the Cold War, and especially after, the Berlin Wall came down, and so the end of the Cold War, and then early 1990s.
Wow.
That's when we've seen this like opposition against this like capitalism and like all this stuff, like against the US, we love you, but we hate you kind of relationship.
Right. Okay.
And like Norway wanting to be a power player, right, in world politics, and, wanting to show off, because then we have all this oil money and we have all this we think we have a little bit of influence. So there's this whole political game going on, and that has nothing to do and should not be part of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Terrible. I have to look into this with the Pulitzer, because we're going to expose those hosts too.
Yeah.
While we wrap this first half, Unni, we have just 1 or 2 minutes to bring it back to the beginning, especially with kids, right? And the isolation and this really toxic culture war and thought control. Some resolutions that you would offer.
I always say that I talk about the 3 C's, the 3 elements that we all need to feel connected. And the first one is confidence in self and confidence in other people, which is trust, right? And then there's contribution, which is really a basic human need for us, because when we give of ourselves, when we feel that we matter, that increases also our sense of self-worth, and it makes us feel like, okay, there's a sense to my life, right? So contribution, giving of yourself, any type of anything you can do to be, connect with other people and help them. Also, that gets us out of our own heads and just into a whole other state of mind, right? Like when we actually think about other people. So that's, the second C. And then the third C is connections. So cultivating relationships. And so those are the 3 elements that we all need. And I think to begin with, the most important thing we can do right now is to discover our sense of self-worth, our, self-confidence, and to build on that, because only when we do that will we be courageous enough to speak up, to stand up, and to actually, come together as one people and unify, despite the things that they're trying to separate us, between blacks and white, between, male and female, all the things. We need to be courageous enough. But in order to have that courage, we need to work on our sense of self-worth. It's I get up in the morning and I just sit down, and for 2 minutes, I take a deep breath and I ask myself, how can I love myself a little more today? How can I respect myself a little more today?
Yep. And it's
And
compassion on both sides,
Yeah.
not just the side that,
Yeah.
you know, people are ramming home, you know,
Yeah.
supposedly for the underdog or,
Yeah.
you know, the fringe or the minority or this or that, like
Yeah.
not, which is a perfect segue into part 2, which is Calvin Klein having the audacity to run with a campaign they ran with. And then on top of it, saying that they were going to block and silence anyone who disagreed with them. So that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like, sure, have your message, but you're then going to go as far as, you know, bullying and silencing people who dare to disagree. So compassion on all sides, you a-holes. I'm going to wrap up this part. Unni, we're going to go into part 2 on that note, all things gender. So everybody stay tuned for that. Okay, great. I'll see you there.
Yeah. Perfect.